Welcome everyone. The topic of today's lesson, the structure of power in Brazil. In this lesson, we're going to explain the division of power into three branches: executive, legislative, and judiciary. We're also going to look at how each of them works and the roles assigned to the representative positions in the executive and legislative branches, like president, deputy, senator, among others. Let's get to the lesson, everyone. The structure of power in Brazil. Brazil is a presidential federative republic. But what does republic mean? Because the head of state is elected by the people. Federative, because the state is political autonomy. And why is it presidential? Because the head of state and head of government are embodied in the figure of the President of the Republic. The division of the structure of power in Brazil is into three branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. The legislative is in the National Congress. The executive is in the Planalto Palace. And the judiciary is in the Supreme Federal Court. The President, everyone, forms the roles of head of government and head of state. But what is a head of government? The head of government is the executive, who takes care of all the project-related aspects. It's really the decision-making part of a government. And the head of state is a more representative, more symbolic role, where the president deals with foreign affairs, more like, diplomacy, folks. But we also have to see why the President of the Republic in Brazil is referred to as both head of government and head of state. In other countries, like England, for example, we have a monarchy, which has a king, and we also have a differentiation of government systems, like parliamentary systems. In a parliamentary system, we have the head of state, who is the President of the Republic. And the head of government is the Prime Minister, who is elected by the members of Parliament. So see this distinction. Let's move on. In the National Congress, you have the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the House of Representatives, you have 513 federal deputies who represent their states. And in the Federal Senate, you have 81 senators who also represent their states. Now, in the Federal Senate, senators are replaced every 8 years. And in the House of Representatives, federal deputies are replaced every 4 years, folks. Now, we're going to look at something about the flow in the legislative branch at the federal level, how laws are approved. I would like, in this case, for Ana Lucia to come and give you a presentation on how this whole process works here.
Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm here today to talk to you, to explain a little bit about how the process of approving bills works at the federal level. I think it's really important for us to understand how this flow works, because many times people hear that a certain project received an amendment or was vetoed by the president, and they end up not really understanding what that means or how it will be handled afterwards. So let's go. The bill can come in through 4 different channels for approval in Congress. So it can come in through the executive in the case of the Presidency of the Republic. It can also come through the legislative branch or be presented by a federal deputy or a senator through the judiciary, or even by citizens, which are called popular initiative projects. When the bill is usually submitted, the first door it goes through is the House of Representatives. It's evaluated by the deputies here. If this project is rejected, it will be filed away. But if the deputies evaluate this project and approve it, it is sent to the Federal Senate. The same thing happens if it's the other way around. If this project comes from the Senate, it will also be sent to the House of Representatives for approval and vice versa. So in this case, when it is sent to the Federal Senate, it can be rejected, in which case it gets filed away, or it can be amended or approved. So if it gets amended, then it has to go back to the House of Representatives, where they will evaluate it. If it's rejected, it will be filed away. And if it's approved, it is sent to the Presidency of the Republic. In this case, if the Senate approves it directly, it goes straight to the presidency. Once it reaches the presidency, what can happen? The presidency can either veto or approve the bill. If the president approves it, he gives it a sanction, and that bill is sanctioned and becomes law. But if the president vetoes that bill, it's not archived, no. It will be sent back to the National Congress. And why does this happen? Because the president doesn't have the final say on a bill. Because that bill there, the deputies, have a very strong representation. They are there representing the states, the population of each state. So, that's why this representation ends up being very strong. It ends up being greater than just the opinion of the president. So that's why it goes back to the National Congress. And then Congress can reject it. If Congress rejects that veto, it becomes law. If Congress upholds the veto, then it can be completely archived, or it can be partially archived, which means it could come back up for discussion in the future. Okay, I hope you all understood it well and that it was somewhat easy to grasp how this process works. Okay, and now we're going to go back to the class with Professor Redondo.
Guys, look, for your reference, let's take a look at the huge amounts of money that are spent in the National Congress to pay the salaries of federal deputies. It's interesting to know about this. Look, the salary of a deputy is represented here. Then there's the cost assistance, and there's the coton, which are expenses related to maintaining their offices, to maintain security. All the paperwork and documentation, folks, Xerox copies, all of that is in these offices and is included in that total and in that estimated monthly amount. Then we also have housing assistance. The budget for offices allows for up to 25 staff members in their advisory team. Also, the total number of deputies amounts to a relatively large value or not. It depends. Let's take a closer look at this next. But out of the total of 513 deputies, costs an annual expense of $1 billion. Now, whether it's high or low, let's analyze and hold the deputies accountable to do a good job. That we evaluate all these expenses and ask them to reduce their spending, which is part of cost-cutting programs, like the federal government is advocating today. We need to reach and hit our targets, so it's important. That's why we're showing a slide to give an idea of the salaries that federal deputies have. This data is in the handout, a reference for you to consult, okay? Now notice that out of the total of 513 federal deputies, in some states with a small population, we have the minimum number, which is a total of 8. We have here Rondonia, Acre, Amazonas, Tocantins, totaling 8. The one with the smallest population is Acre. Then we have the one with the largest population, which is São, Paulo, with 70 representatives and federal deputies, folks. And then comes Minas Gerais and Rio de Janeiro. This is just a reference for you to get an idea of the representation of the states with the Union. Now, we're going to talk a bit about the roles of politicians, the people who represent us in the three branches of government. Notice that in the executive branch, we have the president, whose role is to manage the country. He appoints ministers, ensures compliance. With the federal constitution, commands the armed forces, signs and creates bills, issues decrees, and provisional measures. Look at how much there is, folks. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this part, because we have all of this in the handouts for you to see. And what is the role of the governor? He manages his state, appoints state secretaries, seeks funding and takes out loans for projects in his state, and creates the projects that are submitted for approval by state deputies. Takes care of education and the education network as well, and promotes partnerships with the mayors of the municipalities. And what do mayors do? Well, mayor manages his municipality, the allocation of resources coming from the union and the states. He makes sure there are no excessive spending under the fiscal responsibility law, and presents the executive's projects to the city council, which are evaluated by the council through the council members. Then we have the roles in the legislative branch. We have the federal deputies. What do federal deputies do? Federal deputies propose new laws, discuss and vote on provisional measures, monitor the actions of the executive, discuss and vote on the union budget, the multi-year budget, and sometimes, right folks, they even initiate processes against the president. State deputies also have their roles, but they operate at a more state level, right? They evaluate proposals, resolutions, decrees, amendments, bills, and motions, all related to the state. And they also investigate occurrences of illegal acts, like complaints, parliamentary inquiry commissions, and authorize the governor to take out loans. Now, we're going to talk a bit about the city council members. City council members, we call them city council members, who takes care of the good administration of the municipality, but more in terms of looking after the peace and well-being of the population. They don't have much representation in terms of projects. Some of them want to propose projects that are not within their jurisdiction, so they become unconstitutional. But the city council member, their real importance lies in the smaller activities with the population, where they represent them in the government. Well, we talked about these actors. Let's talk a little about the judiciary, where we have the ministers who oversee the enforcement of what's written in the Brazilian Constitution, folks. We have the Federal Court of Auditors, the Federal Comptroller General's Office, state bodies, all of which are evaluated by the Federal Supreme Court. We also have the Superior Court of Justice, and we also have the judiciary, the state courts, the judges, who also evaluate how the municipal accounts are doing. This is very important because there are many complaints that can reach the Supreme Federal Court. These complaints, we talked about all the actors, but what about the main one, folks? It's the voter. The voter is the majority shareholder of a nation. He takes care of the public treasury. What is the public treasury? It's the control of public spending, folks. We always want the voter to make this assessment, to question the spending, to always be present so that they can have a conversation on equal terms with the politicians. We conclude this class here, and the topic of the next class is about system, form, and regime of government. There are people who get confused about this, folks. You guys are going to learn a lot about this, okay? Don't get to watch the class.